Hi and welcome to the channel. My name's Charles Lastic and this channel is all about building an extraordinary mind, an extraordinary business and extraordinary wealth. So today's video is around wealth, and it's the 6 ways to manage your money in order to grow your wealth. If you don't manage your money, it's obviously pretty difficult to grow your wealth. So that's why it's an essential component of that. It's no point in just producing it and then having it all fritter away. It's the management of the money that grows the wealth in the long term. So I've sort of looked around other people's sites on this, and not disparaging anybody, but people talk about rules like 50, 30, 20. Well, I've been a financial advisor and a financial planner for more than 30 years. And frankly, those sorts of things don't work. In the real world, talking to real clients and then going back to them year after year and seeing what you've advised them to do and what they actually put into place and what works is what gives this channel, I think, its power. And we'll see that as we go through this particular video. Okay, cue the intro. Hi and welcome back. So today's video is all about how you manage your money in order to grow your wealth. It's fine producing wealth, and there's lots of people out there showing you how to produce wealth, but if you don't manage the money, then it'll all fritter out the other end. And it's how you properly control your money in order to produce wealth that what today's video is about. So at the beginning I said that really arbitrary rules like 50, 30, 20 don't work. Well, the reason is that frankly it depends on the person. So if you're only earning 30, 40,000 a year, then most of your money is getting taken up with your subsistence needs, putting food on the table, paying your electricity bills, etc., etc. If you're earning 100,000 a year, then you are much more capable of running those types of rules. So really it depends on mindset, but it also depends to a very high degree on actual income. Whereas the system I'm going to show you today is much more relevant to everybody because it's much more personalized. Okay, so what's the first way? Expenditure analysis. So the video is manage your money. So there's going to be some work involved. If you want to become wealthy, you're going to have to do some work for it. Simple as, right? So expenditure analysis is about keeping records of all of your money and having a good idea where it all goes. So what you do is you treat yourself and your family like a business. No business would operate without knowing where the money was going in the business and where the money was coming from. So a family should be operated in the same way. Obviously don't mix the accounts, but it should be operated with the same basic principle. Know where the money's coming in, know where the money's going out, mitigate the risks. That's what all good business owners do, and that's what you should do to grow your wealth. So what do you do with the expenditure analysis? Okay, so the first thing you look at is 3 separate areas. So those 3 areas are subsistence, lifestyle and aspirational. So when you record your expenditure, and you should record everything, so you should get yourself a budget planner, a spreadsheet, there are apps on phones, all sorts of things, and really keep all your receipts, and once a week, twice a week, log them all into your system so you know where all the money's going. Same as a business would be expected to do, right? A business has to do it legally, but you should do it just for control of money. If you don't control something and manage something, it won't grow. So it's about looking at your expenditure and not getting caught out. But you break your expenditure down into those 3 areas. What do you absolutely need to have? Paying your mortgage, paying your electricity bill, the food bills, that kind of thing. Some items on the terms of lifestyle, of course, are variable. Do you have an expensive car? Do you have a cheap car? Well, you don't need an expensive car, but you may not want a cheap car, right? So where's that line? And each person has to determine where that line is and say whether that comes into subsistence or into lifestyle, and you could even split the cost across both of them. Aspirational is much more about what you want, you know, lots of holidays, that kind of thing, much nicer standard of living. That's much more about aspirational. But I would say that lifestyle is probably the lifestyle that you have today, and subsistence is bottom end. If you had to cut everything out and not have any, you know, no meals out, no holidays abroad, nothing like that, that would be under subsistence. So the first thing that absolutely has to be controlled is expenditure. And how do you control it? You write it all down and you record it so you can see where the money's going. Right, so all of that comes down to record everything. And when I mean everything, I mean everything. We've got another video that we'll be producing showing you how to actually do that and set up your bank accounts and this kind of stuff to enable that measurement to happen very, very easily. But it's essential we record it, because what gets measured gets managed. Simple as the great Peter Drucker. Okay, number 2. Cash flow measurement. So as I said, we will have another video around this and how you manage the cash flow. So where's it coming in from? Where does it go to? How do you manage it? How do you make sure that it's going into the right account? And how do you make it easier for yourself to manage it and then record that income? So you use the bucket principle with your money eventually. So once you put it in the bank accounts, you then have separate buckets mentally, right? And these are the 4 buckets. You have a 1-year bucket, which is essentially, this is money that you're putting aside for holidays, that kind of thing. Washing machine gets replaced, whatever. You've got an emergency fund. The emergency fund should be a minimum of 3 months earnings. Better still have around about a year's earnings as an emergency fund. Depends what your earnings are, but you need to decide what is important to you. So 1 year and an emergency fund. You need then, those 2 will be cash, right? And you can save them in, even the emergency fund, you can save them in 6 months accounts, which gives you higher rates of interest and whatever. You have to split it down, and maybe you would even split those buckets, but the point is it's cash. Then you've got medium term. Now you're talking about investments. So in the UK, you're talking about ISAs, and in the US, I believe you're talking IRAs. But generally, these are tax. Most countries have something like this: tax advantage investments. In other words, they grow tax free. And yeah, that should be your medium term investment. So this may be putting the children through college, university. It may be whatever you want to save it for, but it's money that you can get your hands on if you absolutely need to. But generally it's got predetermined needs or not, or you're just building your capital over time. Yeah. And then last but not least, it's not surprised that you've got a long-term fund, and these are pensions and ISAs. So that's your retirement fund, and making sure that you've got sufficient for that. How do you know that you've got sufficient for that? You look at that, right? Because if you know how much do I need for subsistence, how much do I need from lifestyle, how much do I need for aspirational, a simple projection of how much money you're saving and how that's likely to grow over time will tell you if it'll meet those needs or not. All financial planners will be able to do that for you, and that's actually what they do. So it's making sure that you've got the right thing. But if you don't record the expenditure, you can't control it. Simple as. Every single client I've ever asked to do this who's done that has ended up being wealthier. 100%. There's no failure. That's so important. Then you've got your buckets. Make sure it's split down into different areas. Obviously, pensions are invested in the long term. Okay, so then once you've got that management set up, what do you need to also do? You need to have protection. So what if protection is, what's the impact if you die? What's the impact if you're disabled? What's the impact if you lose your job? What if you're disabled where you can't work for 4 or 5 years, or you can't work permanently? So this is all about making sure you've got the right insurances in place while you're working. So if you're the sort of person that saves, and we will show you later on how you can make sure you're wealthy, the thing that gets in the way is obviously if you have a serious illness and then can't work. You should be keeping your skills up to make sure that you are always in work, or you're running your own business or whatever. But insurance is about making sure you get there and taking that risk off the table. Always have good insurance, because your family will depend upon it, and so will everybody else. You know, my father died when I was very young. I was 2. My mother raised 3 children on her own, and sometimes for years she would go out to work all day, come home, feed us, and then go out to work again. Literally 5 or 6 years in order to put a roof over our heads. That was the lack of insurance. So I'm a big believer. Make sure you do it. Okay, buying assets. So what's an asset? An asset is something that produces you an income stream. Yeah, there are assets like fine wines and cars and those kinds of things, but it has to be appreciating in value to be an asset. So generally the home you live in, yeah, may be appreciating in value, but that may be more of a coincidence. Here in the UK, it tends to do that because we're an overcrowded nation, but in lots of other countries, house prices don't go up so much, right? And in the end, you are going to have to live somewhere, so it's not an asset. So how do you define an asset? It produces an income stream, ideally. And then if you've built sufficient assets and you've bought sufficient assets and the income stream matches your subsistence and your lifestyle, you can decide to stop work. It's up to you whether you move on to aspirational or not, right? But it's the assets then produce your work, replace your work, and give you the income stream you need. Okay, so again, it's about income producing assets. Now here we get into a rule that absolutely does work for people. Now you follow this rule and I guarantee you, if you start young enough, you will be wealthy when you're older. Guarantee. Okay, what's the rule? It's the 30% rule. So every time you get a salary rise, no exceptions, you take some money towards inflation, yeah, that's going to happen. Some money towards your lifestyle, but 30% of your rise goes into your savings plan, which is your 4 buckets up here, right? If you do that every year, you get a rise, and every time you move jobs and get a rise, and you do that religiously, you will become wealthy, at least relatively wealthy to the earnings that you are producing. But you certainly won't be on the breadline. Okay, so 70% of the money, inflation and lifestyle, but 30% of every rise goes into savings. And that over the years gets compounded on and on. If you start that when you're 20, by the time you retire at 60 odd, yeah, you'll absolutely be wealthy. Which saving pot it goes into will depend on how you built those. Obviously, you need to build the 1 year and the emergency first, then build the medium term, and then build the long term. Doesn't mean you can't start the medium term and the long term at the same time as well. Okay, so assets and going in here. Right, now here's an interesting one, adjusting the investment risk. Okay, what do I mean by that? Very simply, people have different attitudes to investment risk, and sometimes the longer their time frames, the more risk they can afford to take. But some people can't cope with the volatility of stock markets and things like that. So it depends upon their attitude to investment risk, right? Now, you'll find an awful lot of financial advisors and planners will just put you into a plan based upon your attitude to risk, because they have a regulatory duty not to give you too much risk. But however, think about it yourself, right? Because if you've recorded your expenditure, this is where we go back to it again, because your expenditure is your lifestyle. And you've built up your longer term savings and your medium term savings so that you know pretty much, all things being equal, that you will hit your subsistence living. Then when you're then going up to your lifestyle, you can maybe take a slightly higher risk on that particular investment. So maybe you have one pension scheme which has hit that line, and maybe you have another pension scheme which is taking a slightly higher risk and moving you more towards lifestyle. And then if you then get beyond lifestyle and we're saying, okay, we want a very comfortable retirement, or we want to be wealthy, you can take a bigger risk with some of those investments, because providing you've got subsistence and lifestyle covered in the short, medium and long term, you can take a potentially bigger risk to go for aspirational. And a good financial planner will help you to do that, or read up and study it yourself and make decisions, right? So adjusting investment risk helps you get there faster, providing you've got the length of time. So last but not least, I've mentioned this a couple of times, a good financial planner. So I'm not talking about an insurance salesman. I'm not talking about somebody who sells you an investment. I'm talking about somebody who sets up a financial plan. There should be 15 to 20 different points on it. What's your protection? What do you want from this? What do you want from that? What are you going to do about the kids? It's all about future projections and what you're trying to achieve, and then getting your financial plans to come together to produce to what you're trying to get. It's a very personalized thing, and a good financial planner will have knowledge. And if you've got somebody who is used to dealing with people at your level of wealth, they're used to dealing with lots of clients, therefore they know what works for them. But one of the things they do is they give you discipline. So if you say, I'm going to go by the 30% rule, and they write that down, the next year when you get a salary rise, is it going into your pension scheme, right? And you may be able to say to the person, well, actually this has happened this year, I'd rather do this. But if it's on your financial plan and every year you go off your financial plan, then you're not taking your financial plan seriously, and your financial planner should have the courage to say to you, hang on, where's your discipline here? You're not going to achieve it. Every time you go off plan, the more likely you are not to achieve what you're trying to achieve. So the ways to manage your money: absolutely manage the expenditure. So I'm not saying to you where to spend the money. I'm saying know where you spend the money. And when you know where you're spending the money, you can decide if that's right for you or it isn't. Does it meet how you're spending the money? Does it meet your goals? If you want to retire at 50, then you better be doing an awful lot of savings, right? Otherwise, it's a dream. It's not a goal. Cash flow management, managing your buckets. As I said, we've got another video on how the cash flow to manage that, and how you set up the bank accounts for that. Making sure you're well protected. The cost of insurance is tiny compared to the benefit and the peace of mind it gives you, worst case scenario. Make sure you're buying assets that produce income. Use your 30% rule. Adjust for investment risk. And last but not least, you get a good financial planner. Those are the 6 best ways to manage your money. I hope you found that useful. If it was good, please give me a like button. If you want to see a lot more of this type of stuff, then subscribe to our channel. I promise you it will be worthwhile. I've got some fantastic stuff to put out there. So thanks for listening, and goodbye for now. Thank you.